Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Daily Word, Tuesday of this week of August. Glad you could join me for our time together. We have got a little bit of some much needed rain, so that's always a good thing, and it always refreshes the earth. Just a reminder that tomorrow night is our summer Wednesday night. We'll be in the shelter. I'm going to grill food. And if you want to bring a dish, you're welcome to do that. I know someone's going to bring some pasta salad. So if you want to bring something along, you're certainly welcome to do that. And we'll gather at 6 o'clock, and then we're going to talk about the parable of the shrewd manager. And that'll be our conversation for tomorrow night. So if you're going to come and you haven't let me know, please let me know. I'm going to go grocery shopping tonight, actually, and decide what it is that we're going to have. So that's tomorrow night at 6 o'clock. So this morning's text is from the book of Hebrews, chapter 11. Part of it is what I read on Sunday, but it's a little bit further, and it's a little bit less than what I'm going to talk about on Sunday and preach about on Sunday, but it's this ongoing conversation that the preacher of Hebrews writes to the early Christians who are struggling about faith. And he likes to recount the heroes of our faith. And so it's a little long, but just bear with me. By faith, Abraham, when put to the test, offered up Isaac. He who had received the promises was ready to offer up his only son, of whom he had been told, "It is through Isaac that descendants shall be named for you." He considered the fact that God is able to even raise someone from the dead, and, figuratively speaking, he did receive him back. By faith, Isaac invoked blessings for the future on Jacob and Esau. By faith, Jacob, when dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph, bowing in worship over the top of his staff. By faith, Joseph, at the end of his life, made mention of the exodus of the Israelites and gave instructions about his burial. By faith, Moses was hidden by his parents for 3 months after his birth, because they saw that the child was beautiful, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. By faith, Moses, when he was grown up, refused to be called a son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to share ill treatment with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He considered abuse suffered for the Christ to be greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking ahead to the reward. By faith he left Egypt, unafraid of the king's anger, for he persevered as though he saw him who is invisible. By faith he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of the blood, so that the destroyer of the firstborn would not touch the firstborn of Israel. By faith, Abraham, by faith, Isaac, by faith, Jacob, by faith, Joseph, by faith, Moses. This is this partial list of what we consider, spiritual giants. It's who we look to. Their stories, their faith is meant to inspire us, to encourage us, to push us along, to embolden us even when life is tough, to keep going. This litany that the preacher of Hebrews gives was meant to be an encouragement to those who were listening in those early days, to when they were overwhelmed, when they were full of anguish, to look up and to look to the pioneers of their faith. And importantly, to trust God for the long view. I think that's kind of where we struggle in our faith journeys. We often in life, and me included, we often in life have a short view. We want to get from point A to point B, and we only see point B, and we want to get there as quickly and as pain-free as we can get. And when we get to point B, then we'll figure out what point C is. And maybe that's okay when we're running errands. Maybe that's okay even, when we're raising our kids. Sometimes the best we can do is point A to point B. Sometimes when you're physically struggling, sometimes I feel that way. I just need to get from point A to point B. I think that often in the mornings when I struggle first thing, I just need to get from my bed to the shower to here, point A to point B, and then figure out what physically I can do. We often have a short view of life. These pioneers of the faith and the preacher of Hebrews reminds us that we really need to have and trust God with the long view of our faith. And it's a reminder. We look at these people, and even folks in our own lives who've gone before us, we look at them as heroes of the faith. They went ahead of us. They persevered when times were tough. We look at them as heroes. And I'm going to talk a bit about that on Sunday. But we should consider for ourselves where we are now in our faith journey, that faith is not something rare, and not something heroic, but it is an intrinsic part of the made-in package as God created us. We have it. We're human. We're built with it. It's part of who we are. We're made in that powerful thing of faith that God's given us, this measure of faith. We could list, I know you could and I could, we could make a list of the things that we have done by faith. When we couldn't see from A to B, the long view was out there, and we had to do something by faith. We could make a list of those things. Like I said, it may begin and end with getting out of bed. But for us, we realize that faith at work in us inspires us to live more deeply, to live more generously, to live more fully in our lives. And I think the challenge for us in these days, we are inundated in our lives with bite-sized pieces of news. And they draw our attention, and they might get our dander up a bit. And our view is short. But our faith journey, by faith, we're called to live with the long view and to know that God's going to move in us. And faith isn't heroic. It's just not. It's not heroic, and that kind of faith isn't rare. That's what jumps out to me about this idea of faith. We think in order for us to have faith, we have to be heroic and we have to live it out in some amazing way. We really don't. It's not heroic. It's intrinsic. It's part of us. And what it really calls us to do is have this long view of God as God moves in us and calls us to do certain things. That's really where we are. It's really what we're called to be. I've started working on my Advent stuff, and people are laughing at me. You can't believe you're working on Advent already. Oh, I know. But, two things. I'm taking the long view. But secondly, I know that where I am in life, I can't do it by myself anymore. That's why I'm inviting people not to do the work. I'm inviting people to be in conversation with me about Advent. Now, unfortunately, no one's taken me up on it. No one said, okay, Jim, I'll join the conversation. But I have to take the long view because physically, I have to be ready to go when Advent hits. And that's how we have to be in our lives, looking ahead, trusting that God's going to get us, not just from point A to point B, which is important, but that we'll have the long view that by faith, we move. And it's not just our ancestors that we think had an heroic faith. They didn't. They had faith. And that's what we have and you have inside of you. You really do. We simply, I think, have to tap it and trust that God is going to guide us in our lives. And so I hope that that's a good word for you this morning as we go about our days, as we go from point A to point B, as we make a difference, and that faith, remember, faith lived out, that intrinsic deep inside of us faith, then inspires us to live more fully, more deeply, more generously, more lovingly, more kind. It just shapes us. And so these pioneers of the faith had a long view. And so should we. To trust God is going to get us through. And that's where we are. And that's what God calls us to be. So I hope we can take a look at the long view of where God's calling you and me to be. So thanks for joining me as we live our lives together. Know of God's love that surrounds you. Know of my love for you. And I will see you tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. Have a great day.